I am the chess strategist, and today we're going to win another chess game. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of our chess speedrun. Today we are going to be playing a 10+5 rapid game. And in our last game we played the London system, and we had an interesting game where we had control of the e5 square and we used our pawns to prevent our opponent's pawn breaks. And once we had the opportunity, we broke in the center and we attacked him with all our pieces, and we were able to win some material and then convert a clean win. And today I'm hoping that we can do the same. Let's see if we get the white or the black pieces. And I have been working on some interesting content ideas to spice it up a little bit. We are against Igor Besanov, and we have the black pieces. He starts with e4. We're going to play Sicilian. Yeah, so we've been working on some interesting content ideas to spice it up a little bit, and I hope you guys are going to like those videos when they do come out. We're going to go with e6. And we're going to see if our opponent goes for the traditional open Sicilian or if they go for an anti-Sicilian. We do get the bishop c4 variation of the Sicilian, which is a variation where our opponents almost always are going to drop this bishop back to b3 and try to have nagging pressure along this diagonal. But as you might notice, this pawn is doing a pretty good job of just making that diagonal weak for our opponent. They really don't have a great way of breaking with their pawns yet to open this diagonal. So we're just going to play a6. And a6 is nice because it prepares b5. b5 is now going to come with tempo because they have a pawn on, or bishop on c4. And so they've prepared a square for their bishop. We're just going to play b5 so we can win the tempo immediately. And now we're going to just develop our bishop. And we're going to create an attack on this pawn. Nice. Our opponent decides they want to defend the pawn. Makes sense. And we're going to develop our knight, develop our bishop, and castle. So this is a very nice position. We have a lot more space on the queen side with these pawns. We're preparing this d5 break whenever we want to play it. And we can just develop our bishop to e7. Which is a nice move because now this pin is really ineffective because there's no pin. Now the bishop is here. We're creating some pressure on the diagonal here inadvertently, so if he tries to pin us and then play e5, it's not going to work. Alright, so he tries to make a pin, but there's really no pin to be had. You might go for e5 here. In that case, we'll just jump our knight to d5. Okay, so our opponent here has decided he wants to create a battery with his queen and bishop. That way, if we do play the move h6, he can take, and he gets two pawns for his bishop and possibly a perpetual check. He could jump his knight in and create an attack as well. So we don't need to allow that. It's really just not something that we have to allow. So what are our ideas here? What's the best idea for us? One idea that we can do is just developing our knight immediately. Get our knight into the center of the board. It may access d4 or e4 at any moment. Not e4. Sorry, e5 and d4. My bad. Okay, and he does play c3, preparing d4. So he wants to prepare d4. One thing I have noticed, though, is that our opponent tries to play d4. This e4 pawn is going to become weak. So we can use this knight and jump it to a different square, and we'll be able to create an opportunity to attack this pawn if he does play d4 if we move the knight. So let's find a way to move the knight to a square where it's not gonna be in the way. So this move is still impossible. I'm liking the move d5 here. striking first. He wants to play d4, but we're going to play d5 first, creating an attack on the pawn. Notice how all our pieces are starting to come to life. His knight is still not in the game. Alright, and I believe we want to take with the knight here. We want to keep this e6 pawn on the square, blunting the bishop. We don't want his bishop to become a very active, strong piece. Notice how we have a lot of defenders on this square here. So we're not forced into any specific scheme of developing our pieces. We can play to what we want. And here we're going to take with this knight. Why? Because we want to disallow this move from being played in a good version. He decides to go for a rather odd move, I must say. Creating a very backward pawn. Wow. I was not expecting that move. That is an interesting one, I must say. Alright, well, so we can do a lot of things here. I like this knight a5 move. Now, before I play, we're going to calculate it. First of all, knight a5 creates an attack on this pawn. So we're going to be able to... that's not what I meant to do. That was a mouse slip. We do not like mouse slips. Okay, he drops his bishop back. And here we can take, doubling his pawns. And we can lift our queen up. Alright, and this queen is going to be a nuisance. Look how annoying this queen is. Creating an attack on this pawn. It's going to create an attack on this pawn if his knight ever moves. We just actually blundered a full knight and our opponent didn't see. So, as you might see, we're not playing super great here, but we are doing our best. Alright, and we can develop our rook. And here, since he has these weak pawns, we can attack them and force his pieces onto very poor squares. That's the idea. His pieces are defensive, our pieces are going to be attacking, and if he doesn't play actually perfectly, he's not going to be able to hold, and we're going to start winning pawns, and eventually his position is just going to collapse. So that's what we're going to do. Our rooks are very active, attacking weak pawns. Our queen is very active in the center of the board, and has all sorts of options of where to move, and our knights are going to join the activity soon as well. Our knight is going to return from the center of the board through a different route, probably through c6. And our other knight is going to jump either to d5 or f5, where it will continue on towards the center of the board as well. Alright, and I hear our opponent has blundered a pawn. Rather oddly, I must say. Just not counting the attackers and defenders. Alright, and he's creating an attack on our queen, but we can just drop our queen back and still maintain contact with the pawn. And we're still up a pawn here. Not only that, but all of his pawns have been isolated now, so we're going to have 4 connected on this side of the board. One over here. And he's going to have all isolated pawns, as isolated as pawns can get really here. And so our plan is going to be very simple. We have a pass pawn. He doesn't, and we're going to advance our pass pawn. Alright, so we don't want to have his queen on the open file where it's going to be influencing the board. So we're going to knock his queen to an inferior square by playing rooks to c8, controlling the file again. And our moves are going to be very swift here. Okay, so first he's allowed us to simplify. Now we're up a pawn, and our pawn is we're not just up a pawn, but we're actually up an isolated pass pawn on the side of the board. So like, it's the best possible pawn to be up. Pawn on the side of the board, with nothing able to stop it really. So we're going to simplify as many pieces as we possibly can here. And we're going to play this very, very simply. First thing we're going to do is drop our knight so that they're defending each other. And we don't have to worry about any sort of knight attack. So that he can't attack this knight with his rook, and we have to worry about it, or he is not going to attack. He can't invade like this exactly. He can't invade and attack our knight, and we have to sit here and worry about our knight being undefended. We're going to put our rook behind the pass pawn. And then we're going to create some luft, so we're not worried about back rank, and we're just going to run this pawn all the way up the board. Notice how he has a bishop. Bishops can blockade squares, of course, but if our pawn gets to a dark square, he's not going to be able to ever attack it with our bishop, and he cannot control the left square as well. The left square is entirely under our control. So here, let's see. Are we able to play a5, or do we have to create left, or should we move our knight? Well, if we move this knight, it's fine. If we move this knight, we just lose a knight. So let's not do that. Let's not lose a knight. I'm thinking we could advance our pawn. And if he advances, we can take with this knight. Granted, we will get an isolated pawn, but I'm not too worried about that. But we can create some left to just be safe. Let's create left. I like g6. Why? Because he is a light squared bishop, and we want to create a dark squared escape square for him. Our king needs to be safe. Alright, he's decided to advance his pawn, and we are just going to be up another pawn here. That's another pawn that he has to use his pieces to win. And he just trades. Okay. We're up this pawn. Now we have two pass pawns. We have one on the side. We have one in the center of the board as well. And we can advance both of them. Alright, and our opponent has decided to attack the pawn. And we can defend both of the pawns again with this knight move. And he has decided to attack the pawn again, which is fine with me. If he wants to trade knights, I am perfectly okay with it, because we are getting this pass pawn up the board, and our opponent is going to quickly realize that there is not a great way of defending the pass pawn. Now, I can calculate the rest of this position pretty much in my head. We're going to see that his king is going to have to win this pawn in order for it not to promote. His rook is stuck. His rook cannot move. And in that time that his king runs over and trades the rooks off, we are going to be able to gobble up all these pawns, and we're going to have three pass pawns on this side of the board. So we're just going to keep advancing our pawns, noticing that his rook can never move because there's always the threat of promotion. All right, and we're going to keep gaining space. His king is being pushed closer and closer to the corner of the board. And we can wait with our rook. We have the luxury of making a waiting move with our rook here, forcing him to make some sort of move that make his position worse. So a move that would make his position worse, well, he could shuffle his king back and forth, of course. We're going to try to get the opposition on him and outflank him. So here we can outflank him, gain this square. He can't go to this square now. He can't go here. He's going to have to go here or here. One of these squares he's going to have to go to. He can't go here. He can't go to this one or this one. Alright, and he drops his rook over. But we are going to be able to get closer to the rook with a king. And his rook is still bound to this square. Alright. And we can run our king over to this side of the board. Our opponent has been so hell-bent on defending his pawns that he's forgotten to realize that, hey, we do have a passed pawn, and if we get our king over here, this rook is toast. And our opponent realizes that the position is lost and decides to resign. Alright, so let's do some analysis first. We did get a Sicilian defense, and our opponent played this bishop c4 variation. I find this variation very fun to play against because you get the quick idea of queenside expansion very quickly. Your opponent can't really do anything about it. They have to play some defensive move like h3, or you're going to have to drop their bishop back to b3, and you can really start a queenside pawn attack very quickly when their bishop develops like this. And their bishop isn't even good on this square, or on this diagonal. It's being blunted the entire game by this e6 pawn. And it ended up just trading itself for a knight late in the game. It ended up being a completely useless piece, not creating any pressure, and it just sat around and waited to die, basically. So, our bishop, though, because we got to play a6 and b5, gets this nice diagonal where it's immediately creating pressure on the center of a pawn that isn't weak immediately, but eventually is going to become weak. The idea here is we want to discourage him from playing d4. If he plays d4, we win the pawn. So the pressure, while it looks like we're just biting on granite and this pawn's well defended, we're actually discouraging him from creating the most advantage possible. If white can play d4 in the Sicilian, white can get a small advantage. But since we're disallowing that, we're actually keeping a very equal or even better position for black. So we develop our pieces, and our opponent decides to pin even though we do block the pin preemptively. So his piece wasn't very effective on that square. We break in the center. We eventually get our break off, and he doesn't get a break off. He gets his c4 move off, and we traded pawns here. I was planning on something different, which was knight a5. The idea, of course, being we open up this influence, and we want to target this pawn. Of course, this pawn has become very weak because of the advance c3. There's no possibility of d4. Well, at least no high possibility, because we're just going to trade, and it's going to be a full medley in the center of the board. But with c4, there's nothing ever protecting the pawn on d5, or on a d4 break. So we took, but ended up being fine anyways. We won a tempo, and we ended up doubling his pawns. I noticed that this bishop, while it was effective, the game is simplifying into an endgame. An endgame pawn structure is very important. We saw how weak these pawns were later in the game. When you can split your opponent's pawn structure like this, it's almost always worth it if you're heading towards an endgame. So that's what we do. We head towards an endgame, and we trade off all our heavy pieces eventually. But first, we're going to create all sorts of pressure. Pressure on the d file, pressure on the b file, and eventually our opponent cracks and blunders a pawn. We're able to win a pawn. We control both the open files with our rooks. We trade queens, trade rooks, and we simplify in a position, and we understand our win condition. Win condition, get this pawn up the board. If we get the pawn up the board, it's going to be on a promotion square. It's going to be strong. Our opponent has to defend, and we'll be able to win the game. So opponent advances his pawn, giving up another pawn. And yeah, he played this endgame very sloppily. It seemed like he thought it was doomed. He won the pawn back, but in exchange for a piece exchange. So he wins the pawn back, but we get to trade knights. And now it's just rook versus rook, an extra pawn endgame. So these pawns are kind of stalemated here, and this extra pawn is our advantage. We've converted a very complicated position into a position that's very simple, where we're just up a pawn on the edge of the board. And the pawn on the edge of the board is plenty enough to win us the game. Very simple. If our opponent had run his king over, we would run our king over, and just start gobbling his pawns. He's going to take like this. We take, and we win the pawns. And his king is not in time to get back over. This pawn's not going anywhere, so he's going to walk his king over. We're just going to advance. And see, this king is not in time. So we would have gotten the queen and won the game like this. But instead, he decided he wanted to defend his pawns. So he stayed on this side of the board, and we won the other way. The other way is by running our king over to the rook. And as soon as he realized that our king was going to get to this b2 square, he resigned the game because, well, there's not much to do. He cycles his king over, we go like this, and his rook, I mean, if he doesn't want to capture it, he's going to move it, and we're going to promote to a queen, and we're going to have an extra rook. And in this kind of position, there's no hope. I mean, we're going to be able to win this pawn, and we're just going to promote another queen, or we can just checkmate with the rook if we get him trapped on the side of the board. That's an option as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I feel like it was very instructive. We had a very classic endgame where we had an outside pass pawn, and we used it to win. And the Sicilian defense, of course, is a great defense in pretty much every game you get against e4 because you're going to be able to attack your opponent. And e4 players like to attack. They don't like being attacked. In Sicilian defense, you get to attack these e4 players. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I hope you have a good rest of your day. And see ya.